Well, hey again everybody, Zach here with Riddled With This, and today I wanted to talk about Dracunculus medinensis, also known as the guinea worm. Now guys, with this particular parasite, there's a lot to unpack, so just kind of bear with me as I just lay it all out for you. When I'd actually first heard of the guinea worm, it was from this book. This was the book that I posted about in my little video detailing my story up to this point. This book is fantastic. It has so many different pathogens and parasites in it, and I love it. And it's just really, like I said, one of the big pieces of reading material that continued to help foster my interest in parasites and pathogens. So again, the guinea worm, funny name, right? But then you look at its Linnaean nomenclature and you see Dracunculus medinensis. Definitely sounds a lot more sinister. So guys, let's go ahead and talk about it. So what exactly is it? The guinea worm is a roundworm, or more specifically a nematode, and it's known to cause the disease Dracunculiasis, or guinea worm disease. It's what's commonly recognized as a neglected tropical disease. An interesting observation, as I mentioned in one of my earlier posts, some scholars believe that in the account of Noah and the brass serpent in the book of Numbers in the Bible, the fiery serpent being referred to was in fact Dracunculus medinensis, rather than an actual snake. But I don't know, I still kind of think it's a snake, but as I said, definitely an interesting little observation. Another little interesting tidbit of information is that the rod of Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine, shown as a stick with a snake wrapped around it, may in fact allude to the method of extraction of the guinea worm, which we'll elaborate on here in a little bit. Okay, so what's the reach of this thing? It's found predominantly in Africa, particularly in far-off regions where there's a great prevalence of unsafe drinking water. Infection rates today are a fraction of what they used to be. Back in the 80s, infection rates were as high as 3.5 million. But thanks to continuing efforts to eradicate the worm, as of 2021, there have only been reported 15 cases of infection. Okay, moving on. So where does it actually hang out? Well, as I just mentioned, we know that it's predominantly found in Africa. You're most likely going to find the guinea worm in unclean and stagnant bodies of water, particularly ponds, puddles in drying riverbeds, and hand-dug wells that don't have protective walls. And within these bodies of water, you'll find the diminutive hosts that harbor the guinea worm larvae. These tiny little critters that harbor the guinea worm larvae are known as copepods. They're like teeny tiny little water fleas. Yeah, I guess in the end, the family pet in the carpet just wasn't doing it for the flea. It had to migrate to the water and find another way to annoy all of us. Do you guys ever have fleas at any time in your life? We always had cats growing up, and so of course a time or two during my childhood we would have fleas. And we were always told that if we ever caught one, we were to take it and put it in a glass of water and break the surface tension with a drop of dish soap to quickly and effectively get rid of them. But I got news for you. This method's not gonna work on copepods. Anyway, once the guinea worm larvae are ingested by the copepods, they have to hang out in the gut of the copepod for about 2 weeks before they're able to infect humans. And while a good chunk of cases of infection come from drinking water, there have been ongoing investigations into the possibility that guinea worm infection may also occur through the consumption of undercooked aquatic life, particularly aquatic life that hasn't been gutted yet. So knowing where the guinea worm larvae hangs out, it's also interesting to note that it's something of a seasonal parasite. Studies have shown that individuals living in dry areas tend to get infected during the rainy seasons. This is thought to be the result of water accumulating in the dry areas and becoming stagnant. And it's found that people living in wet areas tend to become infected during the dry season. And this may be due to the fact that as water begins to separate and dry out, these bodies can then become stagnant and harbor the parasite. And when it comes to the demographics surrounding the guinea worm's preferred human host, it would seem that the guinea worm is something of a picky parasite. Only this isn't just some kid that doesn't like his vegetables. The age range of the preferred human host for the guinea worm appears to be between 15 and 45, and the guinea worm seems to predominantly infect farmers, animal herders, and individuals bringing drinking water back to their families. With that being said, the guinea worm doesn't appear to be sexist in any way, as there don't seem to be any marked differences in the infection rates of men and women. Outside of that, though, it's important to note that when looking at the specificity at the types of individuals that the guinea worm infects, it's thought that the specific age of the individual infected and the job that they're doing are directly linked, because at the particular age of infection at the current data, farming, herding, and gathering water are the jobs that a lot of these individuals take up in their village. And this is what is thought to make the age and profession so closely linked to each other. Also, for some strange reason, the guinea worm appears to prefer infecting certain ethnicities in different regions more so than other ethnicities. With all this being said, there is no way to build an immunity to guinea worm disease, and it appears that one of the greatest risk factors when it comes to contracting guinea worm disease is having had it the previous year. It's thought that this may be due in part to the same drinking water source becoming continually infected over and over again, but interestingly enough, some believe there might be a genetic component to this. This is because there have been instances of multiple different people using the same water source for drinking water, and some people become infected and others don't. This is what's beginning to lead to the belief that there may be a genetic component present. Gosh, I'll tell you, this parasite's so full of mysteries, we might have to get another special team to come in here and investigate. Can you just imagine Fred or Velma walking up and trying to pull off a teeny tiny little mask off this little this little copepod. But while we're slightly on the subject of dogs, an interesting little sliver of data from 2012 has begun to show that guinea worm disease is also infecting dogs and cats. It appears that the bulk of these cases are isolated to the countries of Chad, Mali, and Ethiopia. It's kind of strange because the data in these studies is showing that cases of human infection remain pretty narrow, but cases of cat and dog infection are becoming more and more commonplace. This may be due in part to the cats and dogs consuming animals that harbor the parasite without showing transmission symptoms, such as frogs, fish, or other aquatic animals. According to the CDC's website, with all of this going on, there is actually a meticulous investigation underway to try to figure this out. From here, let's talk about the danger of the guinea worm, and we'll talk about the symptoms associated with it. As I mentioned earlier, the guinea worm causes Dracunculiasis, also known as guinea worm disease. Now we have to do a deep dive into what actually happens when someone becomes infected with guinea worm. The paraphrased stages of infection for Dracunculiasis are as follows, but let's tell it kind of like a story. So you're walking out of your home one day and you're walking down to the shoreline to gather some water for your family to drink. You bring it back, and when you're ready to drink, as you take that first big gulp, you're unaware that there's a copepod in that water, and inside that copepod are guinea worm larvae. You take the drink, and the copepod makes its way into your body, eventually dies, and releases the larvae. From here, the larvae move about and penetrate your stomach, the walls of your intestines, your abdominal cavity, and make their way into your retroperitoneal area. After doing all this, the worms begin to mature, and they eventually mate. After mating, the male worms die, and the female guinea worm, who can grow anywhere from 70 to 120 centimeters in length, begins to move through your subcutaneous tissues towards the surface of your skin. The female guinea worm hangs out in your body for right around 1 year, after which time she begins to cause a nasty blister right around your lower leg, foot, or ankle. The blister is extremely painful and eventually ruptures, and most people who have it seek relief from the pain by running down to a body of water and sticking their foot in the water. And once the lesion meets the body of water, the female guinea worm pops right out of your foot and releases her larvae. The released larvae are then ingested by other copepods, and the life cycle continues. So with all of this going on, the symptoms that can present are, of course, the white-esque filamental worm, painful blisters or ulcers, inflammation, and usually secondary bacterial infection. Well, shoot guys, is there any kind of actual treatment for the guinea worm? And the answer is technically no. So far, there's not a drug or vaccine that can be used to prevent guinea worm infection. However, some sources do indicate that we have at least 4 drugs that are used to manage the symptoms of inflammation. These are neritisol, thiabendazole, metronidazole, and mebendazole. So now you're like, okay, now what? I've just got this worm hanging out of my foot and I just have to walk around with it? Kinda actually, yeah. Because in order to fully treat the infection, the worm has to be removed. And guinea worm removal is a very meticulous process. First thing that has to happen is the individual has to be isolated from all sources of drinkable water. This is of course to prevent reinfection. From here, the wound has to be properly cleaned, and what most people do from here is place the affected foot into a separate source of non-drinkable water to coax the worm out. It's at this point that the female guinea worm usually emerges and releases her larvae. It's thought that once the female releases her larvae, this makes it easier to pull the worm out. Once the female has emerged and released her larvae, she is then wrapped around either a piece of rolled up gauze or commonly a stick. And from here, the slow, tedious process of carefully pulling the worm out of the wound begins. And full extraction of the worm can take days to weeks. All while this is going on, it's incredibly important to avoid breaking the worm. Of course, during this time, it's also important to try to circumvent secondary bacterial infection through the use of topical antibiotics. Those infected should be sure to use fresh wrapping for their wounds and anti-inflammatories to help manage the pain. And from here, this process is repeated until the worm is extracted. Now, maybe you're a little paranoid again and you're kind of wondering, okay, is there anything that I can do to prevent it? Well, the guinea worm is definitely one of the strangest parasites out there. There's a really interesting initiative going on right now called the Guinea Worm Eradication Program. This is both a national and international group that's spearheading the fight to rid the world of guinea worm. The program attempts to do this through proper case detection and containment. They work to provide safe drinking water. The program works to control the copepod vectors through approved chemical means, and they also try to rally the surrounding communities and provide health education. Yeah, so definitely one of the weirder parasites I've covered on Riddled With This so far. I would have covered it earlier, but I thought about it after I already had 3 or 4 topics in place, so I've just been kind of carefully biding my time to make it up to this point. And guys, the really almost kind of nice thing about this parasite is it's not inherently deadly. It's not just a cold-blooded killer. As long as you're safe about your drinking water habits and use proper wound care and so on, it's not something that's just going to straight up murder you. And thankfully, through continued efforts, as I mentioned earlier, as of 2021, there were only 15 reported cases of infection. So this is something that's starting to go away, and the likelihood that you're ever going to get it is extremely, extremely low. Well guys, as always, I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I mentioned earlier in the week that I finally got a YouTube channel, so if you haven't yet, go on over and take a look at some of the other videos I've already posted if you've missed anything. If you'd like to, feel free to subscribe to the channel. And guys, if there's ever a particular pathogen that you want me to talk about, feel free to reach out to me. I also finally made an email for this. You can reach me through email, drop a comment, send a private message, and I'll be happy to get in touch with you. I'll see you next time, guys. Have a great day.